We're gonna go ahead and get started. What we're gonna do, I really want to open up with a song, um, and we're gonna listen a little bit to another song with Jamila Woods in a little bit. But one of the grounding things for me, because I have been in church like since I was 9, is to open up spaces with just singing and just meditation. And so we're going to do that tonight on Zoom. I'm going to sing a short little ditty and we're going to get into our topic tonight. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. New every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord. Great is thy faithfulness. The steadfast love of our Lord never ceases. God's mercy never comes to an end. They are new every morning. New every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord. Great is thy faithfulness. Whatever you may be coming in here this evening with, stress and worries of the day, sickness and disease, worrying over children, worrying over finances, worrying over your house, worrying over anything, the brakes on the car, whatever it is. I invite you to come and lay those things down and be completely present so that you can take hold of what the Lord has for you this evening and so that you can share space with others. As the song says, and as the scripture says, great is the faithfulness of God. Great is the faithfulness of the divine. God loves, she loves, and I imagine God to be this big Black woman with this beautiful fro and even bigger earrings. God's mercy is new every single morning. So no matter what you're carrying, know that God's mercy, this is here for you. God's love is here for you. Amen and ashe. So great is God's faithfulness. Amen. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the gospel according to a Black woman. That's why we're here, is to share and delight in this book that I wrote. And so I'm going to delight in my own writing. We are going to read, I'm going to read from the introduction. And we're going to do some reading and we're going to do some writing. We're going to do a combination of both this evening. But I want to read from the introduction because I feel like it really contextualizes the book and what I'm talking about. And so if you have it with you, it's on the bottom of page 7. I must be honest. When I initially landed on the title of this book, The Gospel According to a Black Woman, I hesitated. And let me tell you where I landed on that title. I was sitting at Seward Co-op on Franklin. It was in January 2020. So it was a few months right before COVID. I can't remember if I had the flu or not, but I know it was in January 2020. And I was sitting, I think I could even remember the table I was sitting at when I landed on the title of the book. Ashe means amen, for the person who put that in the chat, by the way. It's another way of saying amen. So when I initially landed on the title of this book, The Gospel According to a Black Woman, I hesitated. I wondered if by calling it the gospel, if I was doing too much. Was I being too boastful or even bordering on sacrilege and blasphemy? But the meaning of the word derives from the Koine Greek word, which means good news or truth. I'm not going to try to say it because my Greek is really, really poor right now. I studied it in seminary. We don't want me to pronounce Greek today. Historically, this word has been mostly used in Christian circles, specifically by disciples of Jesus, to testify about his works of healing, sacrifice, healing, deliverance, and salvation. The first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, claim this, opening their respective works with the phrase, the gospel according to assert spiritual authority. This assertion was necessary in the face of extreme violence from the Roman Empire, who silenced anyone posing a threat to their kingdom. Claiming spiritual authority outside of Rome was not only a radical act, it was also a deadly one. So as I ruminated on this title, I questioned whether or not I could apply the same literary device as these authors did. In stating and naming my truth, my witness, could I be so bold as to take the word and claim it as my own? As you see, I landed on yes. I said yes because the truth of my experience navigating systems, the government, the church, the academy, the nonprofit sector, the business sector is valid. My perspective as a Black woman in the United States in 2020, now 2022, is valid. My witness is truth regardless of the credentials I hold or whether anyone else will believe or validate me. And for me to speak the truth and claim spiritual authority is critical in a society that continuously ignores and devalues Black women. And so I did this on purpose because a lot of time Black women don't get to claim any type of authority, particularly spiritual authority. In the original title, I qualified the word Black woman with the word liberated. There were reasons for this. When I first compiled this collection of poems and reflections back in 2017, I initially thought of them as a story, showing how I confronted some areas of my life to find healing and liberation. As I continued to write and revise my original manuscript, I saw that this book collection was bigger than the truth of my journey. Although it includes the story of my journey, it is also about the truth of so many other Black women with whom I share similar stories of triumph, struggle, heartache, and pain. I also removed the word liberated because I didn't want to use it as a barometer to validate my witness. For the same reason, I am careful not to list or boast of other qualifiers here, not because they don't exist, but because the world needs to become more comfortable listening to Black women, period. We need not prove our worth through our education, expertise, social media following, occupation, marital status, religion, ministerial credentials, or any other thing that exists, though we often possess all of these qualifiers and are still not taken seriously. We can and we will exist as we are. And it happens so much, the qualifiers, right? I remember last year, a newspaper, I used to be a part of the Assemblies of God denomination, a newspaper asking me, like they had wanted to interview me for this book, The Gospel According to a Black Woman. And so I had talked about the book, I had talked about all these wonderful things. And then they came back and they asked for the names of my then spouse and my children. And I'm like, what does that have to do with the writing of this book? What does my marital status have to do with the article? And it felt like, and they never published the article in the first place, but it felt like they were looking for a means to qualify me, a means to validate me. And now that I'm on the other side of that marriage, now that I'm on the other side of many of those things, it's like, will I still be validated? Will I still be taken seriously? Even though I don't have some of the qualifiers that society typically looks for, to like, society isn't going to validate Black women anyway, but if they do validate you, you got to be a Christian, you got to be married, you got to be walking the straight and narrow. And I'm like, pause, because God says that I'm enough as I already am. So whether I'm married or going through a divorce or separation, whether I got education behind my name, whether I'm walking the straight or narrow or not, my truth is valid and is good enough. And the literature of Black women has really helped me understand that and have pulled me out of the ideas that I used to hold about how I needed to be perceived in order to be accepted and loved. So that was just a bonus. That's not in the book. That was just me freestyling. Before I close out this introduction, I must also state that this is not a Christian book, though I am a Christian. I affirm, along with the late James Cone, that Jesus is the truth of my story. Yet and still, Jesus is not my only story. I also carry the story of someone whose ancestors were enslaved. I carry the story of estrangement, isolation, and depression in my family of origin. I carry the story of a people who, despite what they faced, resisted and carved out pathways for them to exist. I carry the story of women who have faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles in the boardroom, the classroom, the pulpit, in the streets, the bedroom, regardless of what we were wearing. These stories come together in compounding and sometimes contradictory ways to create a new meta narrative that helps me make sense of who I am, where I am, and how I see the world. Reese, and we're going to play this song in a little bit because I think it's really important to help set the context for this book tonight. Recently, I have been absolutely in love with the song by Jamila Woods called Holy. In this song, she borrows from Psalm 23 and the Lord's Prayer, which is found in Matthew 6 and Luke 11 of the Bible. That lyrics explicitly state and name the holiness bound up in Black women's bodies. As they are, we already are. What a radical notion. It is radical because it is a notion outside of many theological frameworks that stress original sin or inherent unrighteousness, particularly regarding Black women. In the United States, the Black body is the definition of sin. But Black women, because we live at the intersection of race and gender-based violence, and more if we are differently abled, queer, or resource poor, or all the other marginal intersections. We carry the stigma of sin in a way that Black men do not. As a result, many of us, even those outside of mainstream faith traditions, hear me now, regardless of our faith traditions, Black women, we approach our lives believing that we are flawed and evil at our core. We didn't need the church to tell us that because society tells us that every single day. Mostly because of what our bodies make grown men do. I want you to understand that. A lot of times the inherent sin in unrighteousness is attached to sexuality because men won't own up to their desires and say that this is what I desire and put that on Black women and put that on women, period. What would happen if instead of continuing to internalize a lie based on white heteropatriarchal supremacy, we took a position that we are wholly divine, in fact, reflecting the image and wisdom of God, this God who is big and Black and beautiful with this beautiful afro and these even bigger earrings, right? What if we reflect that image? What if we understand that it is the separation from this knowledge that forms the basis of our internal pain and turmoil? Black women. And so for any Black women on this call today, we must adopt this position about ourselves. Black women, if you are reading or listening through the pages of this book, I invite you to consider not only the truth and sacredness of my words, but of your own, which is why I say it's the gospel according to Black woman, not Black women, because my truth is my truth. And it's very similar to the truths of other Black women, but other Black women also have different truths and different ideas and different experiences. And so I didn't want to centralize our experience by saying Black women. I wanted to make it Black woman singular, understanding that there are a lot of similarities and overlaps. What truths do we continue to suppress to make others around us feel comfortable? In what ways do we continually step back or step aside to accommodate others without taking into account how others have failed to accommodate us? How will we rectify these tendencies by moving, walking in the greatness that God has already said is ours? And if you're not a Black woman, which I assume is the majority of folks on this call, but your mother is a Black woman, your partner is a Black woman, your coworker is a Black woman, your friend is a Black woman. A Black woman is running as a candidate in your city or county. You supervise, pastor, teach, are otherwise surrounded by Black women, or you live in a world with Black women. So that's all of us, right? That's all of us. I implore you to resist every tendency you have to push back or discount the words on these pages. Before you ask yourself, is our testimony, our experience, our epistemology valid? Believe that it is. And then I think even as you wrestle with, is this valid or enough? Ask yourself, why are you asking the question? Would you ask the same question if James Dobson wrote this book? Or if Joe Biden wrote this book? Or any other powerful white guy? Would you ask your same questions about validity and epistemology if the face was different? And if the answer is no, just read it and let it settle and struggle with it, write about it. And so we're going to do a little bit of writing tonight, but really challenge your assumptions and why some things that are being said here might make you feel uncomfortable, including me saying that God is a big Black woman with a big, powerful Afro. So my friend Christina Cleveland, I hate to name drop, she just came out with this really wonderful book about God being a Black woman. And I can't wait to read it, but I'm in the midst of, writing prelims. And so I can't pick it up quite yet. But when I do, best believe, I'm just so ready for my complete Christian experience to be liberated and delivered so I can understand God being a reflection of me. So I promised a song. I promised that we would play this song by Jamila Woods. And so that's what we're going to do, because I feel like it really helps to set the tone of what we are talking about, what we're going to talk about even more. So this is called Holy.
Give me today my daily bread. Help me to walk alone ahead. Though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no love. Oh, my smile, my mind reassure me I don't need no one. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. Yea, the bad days may come, the lover may leave, the winter may not. Hey, the map of your palms, the temple you be, you're all that you got. Yea, the bad days may come, the lover may leave, the winter may not. Hey, the map of your palms, the temple you be, you're all that you got. Though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no love. Oh, my smile, my mind reassure me I don't need no one. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. Woke up this morning with my mind set on loving me. With my mind set on loving me. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. I'm not lonely, I'm alone, and I'm holy by my own. My cup is full up, what I got is enough. Nobody completes me, don't mess with my stuff. My cup is full up, what I got is enough. Nobody completes me.
So we've been processing a lot so far. So we're going to have a little opportunity to do a little bit of writing and reflecting on what we've been thinking about as soon as I can pull up the right browser. Way too many Gmails. So as you reflect, I'm going to put these questions in the chat too. As you reflect on the words of Wood's song, and as you think about the introduction and all of the things that we said already tonight, what types of images and thoughts come to mind as she professes her truth? And then how has your truth as a Black woman or a woman of color either been affirmed or invalidated? And if you're not a Black woman or a woman of color, how have you either participated in or witnessed the invalidation of other voices? And as I mentioned, I'm going to put those in the chat. We're going to write for maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and give us an opportunity to discuss what we've been writing and reflecting on. I'll also say the questions again. As you reflect on the words of Wood's song, what types of images and thoughts come to mind as she professes her truth? How has your truth as a Black woman or a woman of color either been affirmed or invalidated? And if you're not a Black woman or woman of color, how have you either participated in or witnessed the invalidation of other voices? We'll come back at 7:07. So that leaves you 10 minutes to write.
Ebony, there's two new people who have come in since we started. I don't know if you want to.
Yes, and so I'm going to repost the question in the chat so that you all have an opportunity to reflect on this. And you didn't get a chance to hear the song if you just came in, but you could still probably derive some meaning from our conversation. And so the question is, what types of images and thoughts come to mind as we talk, as we reflect on the words of Woods in her song Holy, as we reflect on the introduction in the gospel according to a Black woman? How has your truth as a Black woman or woman of color been affirmed or validated? And if you're not a Black woman, how have you either participated or witnessed the invalidation of other voices? And so that's really the question, is like, how have you seen Black women of color invalidated? How have you participated in that validation or invalidation? And if you're not in relationship with Black women or women of color, we should have a conversation. But even if you're not, how are you marginalizing other voices? What women around you are you marginalizing? What queer voices are you marginalizing? Which voices with people who have present different abilities are you marginalizing? Or people who don't have the same educational status as you, or people who may be resource poor or may not live in the neighborhood that you think is the best. And so, because we know that silencing happens on so many different spectrums, this book is about the experiences of Black women, but you can begin to break that down into so many segments of our society. I'll stop talking so you can write. So we have 4 more minutes, sorry. All right, it's 7:07. Time goes by fast when you're writing. I'm going to open it up and really just want to hear from folks. And there are 21 of us on this call, so we haven't gone around and did introductions. So I invite you as you speak to say your name, what part of the cities, I assume everyone is coming from Minnesota, but what part of the cities do you live in? And then share with us what you reflected on. Who would like to kick us off?
Well, I guess I can kick us off. So obviously I'm Christian and teaching minister here at the church at Meeting House, and we live in Eden Prairie. Originally I'm from North Carolina, but we resettled out here in 2003. There were a couple of, I think the piece that was the most productive actually in terms of writing was the second question, or the second set of questions. Because as I started thinking about experiences that I've had where I have seen people, women, but also men of color in particular, around particularly issues of whether it's diversity, racial justice, whatever you want to say, I've seen several examples of people being silenced. And some of it's through sort of, smooth, I guess I would say smooth intimidation, so it's an intimidation, but it's not, overt, it's more covert. The one that I remembered in regards to this was, I think it was around the time of Ferguson. There was a pretty strong cohort at Bethel, which is where I was working, who were struggling for more diversity, more transformation of the curriculum, those kinds of things, and several staff, and a lot of it was also coming out of sort of student life and campus ministry-ish, that kind of sector. And so these would be staff. They're not students, they're not faculty, but they're staff. And they decided to kind of to have something of an informal protest, which wasn't very many people, but it was enough to kind of catch your attention. And the academic dean at the time, kind of went over to this group and basically shook all their hands. But the idea was not to shake their hands. It was to sort of diffuse what was basically an attempt to say, hey, we need to actually get our house in order. And there was another example that I also recall around that same time that led to the dismissal of a young man who, Sean Webster, who was a very strong voice. He was a poet. And they were basically looking for a way to get rid of him, was my sort of assessment at the end of the way that he was treated. And I could think of a couple of others, but that was what struck me, being reminded of those episodes.
I have a couple thoughts, Ebony, if that's okay.
Yes, you want to say your name and what's part of the cities you're from? Are you living?
I'd be happy to. My name's Jenny Bakke, and I am in Edina, Minnesota. I'm on the adult education team with Christian, and then I'm also a member of the choir at Meeting House. And I also have two situations that came to mind. One came after we actually had a Black woman come and preach with us several years ago. And afterwards, a group of us were talking later in the day, and someone very sincerely was curious and said, I believe this is a safe place to talk. I'm just wondering why, basically in a very kind way, it was like, why don't they just get over it? This happened way back in history. Why don't they get over it? And I could almost hear like the struggle in the voice. They were truly curious, but at the same time, she gave a very powerful sermon, and it was a really lovely time. And so I think that was a really interesting thing, a little frustrating for me also. Another one is a little more personal. I have a friend who is, she's a nurse, and she actually was visiting a friend in a hospital years ago. And the charge nurse there noticed what a wonderful job she was doing, just caring for her friend. And so she invited her to apply for a job. And so she went down to the front desk of the hospital. She asked for an application. And the woman at the front desk said, oh, we don't have any kitchen or dietary jobs open right now. And Peg was like, I'm a nurse. She filled out the application, she got an interview, and she ended up telling her story and saying, this is not okay. I'm not sure if I can take a position here. And my understanding is they addressed it, but it's just like, wow, you know? So those are the two things that came to mind for me, similar to Christian, with kind of that second portion of the questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jenny. I'm excited to hear other people share. I just want to say one thing really quick. As those who are not Black women or women of color are speaking, one of the things I want you to think about is not only where you have seen the invalidation, but where you have participated in yourself. Because I think it's really easy for us to dismiss it and say those are other people who have those problems and not own ourselves and our own complicity in it. And so even though this may not be my area of struggle, the intersections, right? I took myself to lunch yesterday at French Meadow by my job. I'm sitting and I'm having my vegan burger. Never again. I'm going to do my salad like I always do because it was way better. I'm sitting and having my vegan burger and I'm working on my computer. And I noticed that there's a visibly differently abled man sitting across from me, and I can hear his tone, and it sounds like he has some type of speech thing. And I like have a reaction and had to check myself about that reaction. It's like, so I'm right now participating in his oppression. I haven't said anything. We didn't have any type of exchange, but even my attitude about him being in proximity to me, I had to go back in my mind and talk myself down. It's like, Ebony, that's not cool. We don't roll like that here. And so my invitation for us is, if you're brave, is to be honest enough about not just saying like it's those people who have the problem, but how have you participated? How have you been complicit in the invalidation of an oppression of Black women or women of color? So thank you so much for sharing so far. I just wanted to give us permission to be honest and vulnerable in this space. Who else would like to share?
Could I just say, Ebony, regarding my first story, and I appreciate the challenge a lot, because what I remember happened, I'm a 9 on the Enneagram, by the way, so those kinds of things are a challenge for me, but all of us pretty much stayed silent, and the majority of us disagreed. And so what that invites me to do is think about, okay, when that happens again, how am I going to handle that in an effective way? So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you for being vulnerable. Who else would like to share? I saw Sister Peace come on camera, but would you like to?
Sure. I didn't get a chance to finish writing, but it's all good. So my name is Peace. I live in the Uptown area, and I I am so grateful for the opportunity to be able to write because I've been slacking there. So, what I wrote was that I've heard this song multiple times. I don't recall recognizing her saying, "Say amen to yourself," and I know, or I'm sorry, I know the word amen to mean so be it. And that speaks to the level of self acceptance that I must have to survive in an environment filled with so much hate for people like me. It also brings up for me the potential fear and or discomfort I can imagine rising in others who are witnessing such a powerful affirmation of what they have likely been conditioned to see as problematic, and that makes me sad. So I stopped writing there. And as far as the second question, how has my truth as a Black woman been affirmed or invalidated? Well, Ebony, you know I'm a big fan of your book. Your book really affirms me, and it really moves me. I mean, even showing up in this space today, listening to you sing and kind of pray, and the song really affirms me. And so I'm just extremely grateful, and it's very inspirational for me to want to walk in who I'm called to be. So I'm thankful for that.
Thank you. Maybe one or two more people would like to share.
My name is Mary, and I live in Bloomington. And I too focused on the second question. Before I came onto this Zoom call, I watched the local news tonight, and there was coverage of the funeral for Amir Locke. And I noticed how difficult it was for me to even watch on the news from a distance his mother's pain and his mother's anger. A little bit of that is because my own personal history, I had a stillborn child many, many, many years ago. So I'm particularly attuned to the loss of a child. But it's more of that, of my discomfort with this woman's pain and anger about a system, the results of a system that I am complicit with. I am part of the majority culture. I'm a white woman, lives in the suburbs. And even though I wasn't there, I was not directly directly a part of what happened, I benefit from a system that creates the kinds of situations that this young man found himself in.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for your reflections.
Can I say something?
Absolutely.
I didn't know if you could hear me. I'm a white guy from Edina, and I have been recently educated in a number of ways of the systemic problems. I personally got involved in the plotting of restrictive covenants in the Minneapolis area, and so I feel I've had an epiphany, and I have no idea what to do about it.
Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
Be. One thing that I would encourage you, so the questions are meant to be reflective on yourself, which is why I said not just the people out there who are, are racist and doing those crazy things, or who are misogynist or who are homophobic, but where does it land here? And so as we, not just tonight, to be reflective and to start maybe journaling and reflecting on your own positionality in your own, because we're always on a journey of learning. And so we get awakened and we keep getting awakening. And the Bible talks about from glory to glory, from glory, right? And so we never master this idea of awakening into full consciousness, I believe, until we actually meet our maker. And so we're all on this journey. How can we continue to further the journey? And as we do that, we'll learn the steps along the way that how we need to be involved to actually rectify things.
What does it mean to further the journey?
And so that's the self-reflective process. And so it's not just about the reading. That's about like, how are you, Elgin? You got an E as your name too. E's dominate the world.
Of course.
That's the metaphor I'm trying to create tonight. I'm just making, a connection because I start with an E as well. But as you are reflecting, as you are thinking about how have you participated? How have you been complicit? How have you benefited from racial covenants? How have you benefited from settler colonialism? And then as you're thinking about those different things, what do you feel the Spirit asking you to do? I think a lot of times that as people start learning these things, they have a hard time sitting with grief and lament. And so that would be the first thing I would suggest is to actually, so what's his name? Oh, David Roth. I can't remember the name of the book, but it's a book about Lamentations I can't remember the name of the guy.
It's by Sung Chan Ra.
Thank you. I was like, I'm going to butcher everything. But he's really talking about how the church has a hard time, even though we have the Psalms and we have Lamentations and we have these texts that talk about grief, we have a hard time sitting with grief and lament. And so as you're doing the reflective process, so you can keep reading, you can do all the education, but unless it really sits here where you're reflecting on your own positionality and how you've shown up and how you've benefited, and then sit with the grief and the lament in that, you could easily, you might not go deeper. It might just stay surface level. And so the challenge is to go deeper through the reflection, through the writing, through the self-study, through the self-examination, through the self-critique, and putting yourself under the microscope to say, how have not just the systems, not just the structures, those are there, not just the church, not just academy, those are there, but how have I personally participated? How have I benefited? How have I been complicit? How have I silenced? And that's a hard conversation because we don't want to put ourselves on the stand. I don't want to put myself on the stand. I talked about the person who I was like, Ebony, what are you doing? Why are you having this conversation, right? And another example happened. So this is at McAllister College, and most of the folks on this campus are white or white presenting, right? But I've had to even check, like there was someone who was coming into the bathroom who appeared to be male presenting. And I said, hey, the man bathroom is over there. And they're like, oh, I know. And quickly, I'm like, Ebony, what did you just do? Because you have no idea what his gender identity is. You made a lot of assumptions really quick. And so like, I have to constantly examine my own self and how I'm complicit in homophobia, transphobia, ableism, all these other things and intersections that I don't sit at. And it's harder to do that because we want to be the good guys, the good girls, to use gender neutral language. We want to be on the right side of history. We want to make sure that we're not doing things wrong. But in order to grow, we have to really put ourselves and face ourselves in some different type of ways. So I'm going to read a couple more pieces.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. I'm going to read a couple more pieces. I'm going to read, because I want us to do a little bit more writing and reflection. And so these second set of readings are really centering the person of Eve in the biblical text. The first piece that I'm reading is called Angry Black Woman, which isn't specifically centering Eve, but I think she can be here too. And this is on page 61 in the book. How should I compose myself now that you have killed my children, raped my mother, and beat me beyond recognition? You forced me to live in dilapidated housing conditions where the rent is higher than a 2-bedroom in the suburbs. Yet you pay me less than the minimum wage and threaten to take that if I complain. I am only of value to you with my tail high in the air. So I bend over and twerk some more, even though I am tired and my feet are sore. How should I compose myself now that you've taken my loves and denied me of my God-given liberty? I will put a smile on my face and laugh with my head pulled back, like those high society girls who pretend as if they don't have a care in the world, knowing that my anger is powerful enough to destroy. I will not bury this godly rage on the inside of me. I refuse to keep silent about it any longer. But I know that you are afraid of my anger. You are afraid of my righteous indignation. You are afraid that what you have done to me, I will do to you. You fail to understand the power dynamics in this complex relationships of yours. You have the military, the police, and Congress behind you. And all I have is my God, my hands, and a multitude of voices standing with me. And so with my hands, I will go to my God who can handle my anger, who won't force me to be silent, who listens intently to my cries and will deal with my oppressors in time. And I will raise my voice along with the multitude of other voices centering Black liberation, refusing to be silent about our oppression to make others comfortable, even if in doing so, it makes us look angry. The second piece I want to read is called Zipporah, which is on 62, right after the poem that I just read. Zipporah. Ebony colored skin that matched the dark of the night. Her hair, the kinky curly type, twisted up out of her face, adorned with a scarf to keep the flyaway curls from falling back in. Garments of royalty clothe her petite body. Colors of purple, ruby, emerald, and gold reflected off of her already rich skin. Brass bangles that her father made for her clinked together as she walked, making an even louder sound as she chased her small children through the arid land. Pursed lips, hips wide, smile bright, and her heart even brighter, heated only because of the rays of the sun bounced off of her beautiful Black skin, blinding others who only wished they could stand out like so. God took care of her dissenters, those who mocked and laughed as she walked by, those who called her ugly as she smiled, those who said that she just needed to sit down and mind her place as she spoke from the depths of ancestral wisdom they themselves did not possess or had long ignored. That Blackness that other women despise and men secretly covet makes the world go round, though no one would ever tell you so. This Blackness birthed in the richness of the Nile River Delta, where the sun is bright and the soil is succulent, and the bounty of life is as present as it was when God commanded the waters to be still. This Blackness is our beginning. To expel it will surely be our end. We're going to flip over to page 74 and read one of my favorite pieces. I remember when I wrote this, I believe it was 2017, and I was preparing for a sermon at my church when I used to preach on a regular basis. Well, not really regular, like once or twice a year. But I was preparing for the sermon, and I remember reading the text, and it was on First Kings, and it was the episode where Solomon is praying for wisdom. And I'm doing this research, and I realized the parallels between this text in First Kings with Solomon praying for wisdom in the text in Genesis 3, where the same wisdom that Solomon is praying for, Eve is penalized for. Just catch that, right? The same wisdom that Solomon is praying for, that God says, because you asked for this wisdom, I'm going to give you all these other things, plus the wisdom, is the same wisdom that Eve is penalized for. Okay? So I remember writing the sermon and then writing this text with that realization, and a lot of realizations that followed that. Sister girl, how they had your name locked up for years. Said it was you who ate the apple, was led astray by your lust, bringing down the integrity of the world with your seductive touches and questioning wandering eyes. They said it was you who'd been entrapping men, bending and folding them in the grip of your thighs, tantalizing them with the fullness of your breast, leading them to hell with the way the sun radiates off of your tightly curled 4C black hair, whether it's locked, picked out, or flowing down your back. So they told you to shut up, put up, dial it back, stay in your place, be seen and not heard, and accept your plight as ordained by God for your sin. And we believe them. We let them drag your name through dung itself. We distance ourselves from you, disassociated ourselves from the most intimate pieces of ourselves so that we would not succumb to the Jezebel, Sapphire, Delilah stereotype. But we've gotten older and a bit wiser. We've had children of our own, the stretch marks in places we didn't think were possible, the graying of our hair, see, while we still maintain our youthful vigor of days long ago, the way our thighs jiggle now as we move. We've learned some things living in our bodies, being in touch with our full selves. And we found out they lied. They told the biggest story of all, and us all believing it was you, Eve. You who destroyed the world, broke up homes, impregnated yourself, knocked yourself unconscious, pushed yourself down the flight of stairs, played the whore, brought misfortune upon yourself because of the way you dress, the way your hips move too much, the color of your lips, because of where you were, because of who you were with. Now we know the story is only beginning to unfold. The truth, your truth, was always here, in plain sight, in between the folds of the pages. Though it took a trained eye to see, because we've internalized the life for so long, we needed help to be brought back to you, brought back to our truth. The truth we bear as women, young and old, rich and poor, Black and white and Latinx and queer and all of us. To see our stories, our identities so intricately wrapped together, though patriarchy has damaged us, forced us to choose sides. None of us are going free till all of us get free. None of us are going free till Eve, sister girl, mother, daughter, friend, from whom all living things come forth, who birthed the world, though the world despised and rejected her. Till Eve rises up out of the pages, reclaims her narrative, tells a story that is just beginning to unfold, to be silent no more, to no longer be a passive or active participant in our destruction. The whole world is at stake. The whole creation groans with groanings that cannot even be uttered for our liberation. Eve, sister girl, we stand with you. We got you. We believe in you just as much as we believe in ourselves, in our own stories that we hold in our bodies, just eager to come out. What time are we at? I'm going to do one more quick one called Not, and then we're going to write for a few minutes. Not. It's on page 88. Not a slave, not nappy-headed, not uppity, not hood, not a sellout, not too strong, not a pushover, not unqualified, not overqualified, not too ambitious, zealous, or religious, not aloof, not aggressive, not angry, not Jezebel, mammy, nor martyr for the cause, not uninformed. I am not, and I refuse to be your expectations, limitations, or vision of who you need me to be. But you are also not the sum total of someone else's expectations. You are not small, not broken, not corrupt, not ratchet, not spoiled goods, not loudmouth, not weak or passive, not insufficient. No, you are the embodiment of your ancestors' dreams. You are more than enough. So my remaining question for us, and we'll have about 7 minutes to write around this. How might customary Western read white cis heteropatriarchal renderings of sacred texts reify the violence that Black women and other women of color experiences? What opportunities do the response found in these readings offer Black women and other women of color? So how do customary renderings of sacred texts reify the violence that Black women experience and other women of color? So as a current context, even though Kim Kardashian is not a woman of color, think about what she's been experiencing in the public eye this week with her estranged spouse and some of the really horrible things he's been saying and doing. That's super, super scary for all of the women who have suffered and are suffering with domestic violence. That's like, his actions are like, they're really, really scary. So, and you think about like this idea of ownership, right? That I own you, you belong to me, when she is her own person. Problematic as all get out, but she's still her own person and is entitled to her own body and her own choices. And so I want us to think about thinking about those texts that I read, thinking about the experience that we see surrounding her. How have customary Western renderings of sacred texts, how do they reify the violence that Black women experience, that women of color experience, that women experience, period? What opportunities do the responses found in these readings offer Black women and other women of color? So 7 minutes, we're going to come back at 7:45, 7 minutes from now, okay? 7:45, we'll be back here. All right, let's bring it back. What are people thinking about? Let's bring it back.
Hey, Ebony.
Oh, go ahead.
My name's Rick. I live in South Minneapolis. I'm a member of Meeting House Church, and I may be on the right wavelength here, but maybe not. I feel like the way that this happens is the men become the central part of the story. They become the heroes. They're allowed to be flawed, usually at the expense of women, and atrocities that they commit are justified by the action, or in some cases just the existence of women. And then in reading these stories, it becomes that women are just sort of like a plot device used to move the man's narrative along.
Yes, I co-sign all of that. Yep. Thank you for that. Who else would like to share?
Piece here. For the first question, I simply said that they have demonized womanhood and blackness, which is a double whammy for the Black woman. And for the second question, I said they offer us the opportunity to question, which gives us the opportunity to expand rather than shrink.
Yeah. Expanding, not shrinking. Yes, yes, yes. Mhm. Who else would like to share? Let's get one or two more voices.
This is Sally, Elgin's wife. I live with the other E. I found it a difficult question. And even for two reasons, I think. One, being in the white majority part of culture, and in some ways not needing to reflect unless I want to reflect. And I think I'm one who really wants to reflect, and yet found it a challenge to do that. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. When you live in a space where you have privilege, wherever the privilege is, you don't have to reflect. The reflecting is the burden of those who are oppressed, right?
Well, but I think it is our burden, and I want it to be my burden. But
Yeah.
I realize even, and I think I've done some reflecting, but the question just became a big enough challenge to me to realize I got a lot more to do. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for sharing. If there are no other thoughts, I want to open it up for questions. And so we spent the last almost hour and a half with me sharing different pieces and us writing. What remaining questions do you have before we close out our time in 11 minutes?
Can you share your sermon about Eve with us at some point?
I could see.
That sounds really interesting.
Thank you. It might still be on the church's website. I'm no longer at that church. So I doubt that it's there. But I can see. I can be back in touch with Christian about that.
Yeah, that would actually be great. I mean, maybe we could even make it a part of the podcast. 'Cause
Okay.
we're gonna take some of this and spice it up and put it into the podcast. So maybe,
Yeah. Yeah, I doubt that I did not leave on good terms
okay.
because I was talking about truth and experience of Black women and all of the things. So I doubt, and then there was COVID and all the other things. And so I preached that sermon in 2017. And it's 2022. So I have or no, 2018. So I have a strong suspicion it might not be there for various reasons. So we'll see.
Well, is it okay if I ask a question?
Yes.
I didn't want to speak too much. One of the things that I was struck by as I was reading through the book was the complex paradox, of being a Black woman in America, and I'm sure that I've run into that, and I've heard that from friends who are Black women or women of color. But the way that you captured in the book, and there are several things that came up. One is the sort of dynamic or dialectic of silence and speech, of wanting to work through, of feeling the need to be silent, and also at times wanting to be silent, and yet also finding writing as a way of bringing to voice the things that are deep within inside of you. I don't know if I have a question in that, but just it's sort of that the experience of writing, and in particular the experience of writing as a Black woman. I wonder if there's more for you to share that, with us in terms of what that's meant for you. What's it meant for you, in other words, to write these books?
Mm-hmm.
And the other piece is sort of connected to me it connects to that was, I mean, I also have written, and I know that it can be an experience in which you truly make yourself vulnerable. And I got the feeling as I was reading through that part of the kind of therapeutic element in this, or the liberative element, or maybe both, of this process was precisely to process the pain, grieve the pain, and move on from the pain. And yet at the same time, you're making yourself vulnerable. So I just wondered about that experience for you, how that's been, what's it meant for you to write these books, and would love to hear a little bit more from you on that.
Sure. And I'll try to remember both questions. Those are big questions by themselves. I think with the first one, the silencing piece. And so I don't think it was ever a desire to be silent, that was something that I wanted. I maybe I'm soft-spoken, maybe I'm introverted. I'm not really sure, right? Somewhere in between, I live somewhere between those things, right? Those ideas of what we say around who people are and how they show up in the world, right? Introverted, maybe, I'm not sure. But I had always felt like I had something to say, and I felt that I was called to ministry quite young, and always had wanted to preach by time I had gotten into college, and felt like I had some things that the divine had laid on my heart. And any church I had been in, so I never got a chance to do that. I never really got a chance to, even though I had heard great feedback around the sermons and the sermon deliveries, never really felt like I had an opportunity to really thrive in that space that I really wanted to. And so I continued to write. And so I blogged. Like, my first self-published book was in 2009. And I self-published that then because it was therapeutic for me and I needed a space to process what I was going through. After that initial book, I felt like I needed a space for me to talk and to process the things that were on my heart that I felt could be helpful for other people, and not really having a space to do that. I created a space for myself through blogging and writing to talk about some of the things that were on my heart, because even though it wasn't a pulpit in a church, no one could take it from me. What are they going to do? Take down my blog? Yeah, that's not gonna happen. And so I felt like it was a space where I could have agency and authority in ways that I couldn't have it inside of institutions, particularly as I have, like I've talked about on this call, like really standing up for the rights of those who are LGBTQ. Most pulpits wouldn't let you preach that from the pulpit. Most churches won't. I've talked about being separated from my soon to be ex-husband. Most churches won't let you talk about that. Most churches won't allow Black people, Black women, even white people to be who they are in their full messy selves without sitting someone down and reprimanding and punishing them. And so in this space that I've created with the Aya Collective, I get to be all of who I am. And so like, and not be punished because I'm not falling inside of the lines that some church or institution or organization wants me to fall into. And so it's not because I wanted to be silent. It's because I know that institutions are silencing agents, not just the church, but academia, nonprofit, government, wherever you are. They are silencing agents for those who identities fall outside of the status quo, unless they're using those identities for their own purpose. So I went to North Central, a small Bible college, downtown Minneapolis. They never called on me for nothing, right? But I'm on the face of their brochure when I was an undergrad, right? Not because they loved Ebony, but because I was serving a purpose, right? And so I think that's the only time when we end up being able to be utilized in these spaces is when our skin color, when our gender, when our identity that lies outside of whatever dominant normative ideas are, when it satisfies an agenda. And so when I worked in nonprofit, the nonprofit I worked for did a lot of coalition organizing, which was great. Great nonprofit, great people that worked there. But I always think about the people that they're bringing around the table to testify at the Capitol, to testify at Congress, to testify in all of these spaces. Are you calling these people because they're needful, period, or you just need their testimony to help further your cause or your mission? So I think that's that one question, creating the space where I could be me without having to feel like I had to sit down because I was having some midlife crisis or whatever. The other piece, the vulnerability, I love being vulnerable. I feel like that's when I am most creative. I feel like that's where I feel the most connected to the divine, where I can throw off pretense and I can be my just full, unapologetic, vulnerable Black girl self. And some people are uncomfortable with that. I don't know what to tell those people, because in order for me to be me, I feel like there's layers to this, right? So not to every person I go up and just exposing my whole self and whole life story, right? That would just be unwise and pretty stupid, right? But the writing in the book, I feel like gives me an opportunity to be vulnerable in ways that sometimes I'm not able to do face to face. And even in the vulnerability here, there are things that I code, there are characters that I hide, there are things that I'm doing so as not to expose all of me, but to expose the pieces that I'm most comfortable with. Because I don't need people all up in my business. I don't want that. And so it's like, I guess it's carefully orchestrating the level of exposure and vulnerability that I'm most comfortable with. And I love it because I feel like that's where people get delivered. That's where other Black women, when I'm able to be me and let down my guards, and it's like, I love the Lord and I have problems with the Old Testament and I had to put the Bible up on the shelf because it was messing with me, because all of the things that I was reading, when I'm able to say that, other Black women get free. If I don't say it, we stay all locked up in oppression. But when I, like this woman who's been following Jesus all her life, says that I can't read the Bible right now. This is me. I can't read the Bible right now because y'all justifying a whole lot of oppression and domestic violence. And I have to put it on the shelf so that I can distance myself in this season. Then other Black women are able to talk about their own experience, and other women of color and other people, period. So, yeah.
Well, I just as a concluding like aside, one of the things that I really loved about your book was it's clearly your story, which is not has connecting points to my experience, but is not my experience. And yet I didn't feel like a stranger in the way that you shared yourself. Like, that's what I mean. That was what I thought was so powerful about the way that you told the story. And I really love that and really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you. So it's 8 and I love y'all, but I need to go eat and I need to feed my children.
Absolutely, you do. And I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of the community, everyone who was here, people who are also watching on YouTube, which is quite possible. We probably have another 10, 15 people watching on YouTube. Just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for leading us through this time of reflection, for letting us interact with your book. And we want to make sure we keep this avenue and conversation open. So let's talk about that Eve sermon. All right.
I might have to preach it from scratch again to have it.
All right. Well, maybe we can figure something out with that. That'd be great.
We might have to. All right. Thank you.
Christian, you read my mind.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Blessings.
Thank you.
Our next Faith and Forum will be in 1 month, where we will be doing, we'll have a presentation on music therapy. So we'll send out information for folks on that. Cheers to everybody. Thank you. Thanks again, Ebony. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Peace.